Good afternoon, everyone. The theme for today's conference is about success stories. My topic today is sometimes failing may be better than succeeding. Like all stories, let me start from the very beginning. When I was a young boy, as a young man, I was often described as not a very good student. Many would say I am just a mediocre student. Let me give you some numbers. For my A levels, I took 4 A-level subjects and I failed 2 of them. And my grades for the 2 of the 4 that I passed was a B and an E. And of the 2 that I failed, well, fortunately, I did not get F9, which is the lowest grade. I had S8. So the 2 that I failed were recorded as subsidiary passes, meaning an O-level pass. I actually did a little bit better for my O-levels. My score for the top 5 subjects was 17. And actually, my score at 17 was not good enough for me to have entered the school where I did my secondary 1 to secondary 4. But because I originated from the same school, they allowed me to continue for my pre-university 1 or 2, even though I had a lousy score of 17. So why do I say that sometimes failing may be better than succeeding? I discovered that my regular failures in my studies could be turned into an advantage. I'm going to tell you what happened. You see, I realized that my passing rate for examinations was around 70%. In other words, every 10 examinations I took, I take 10 subjects, okay? I would pass like 7, and I would fail 3. And so, since I could not be like many of my friends, or particularly all my friends, were doing better than me in their studies, I had to find a way to turn my so-called failings into advantage. So what do I do? Simple, right? If I don't have quality, so I focus on quantity. So I took, pardon my language, a hell of a lot of examinations. By the time I was 40 years old, I had completed 3 masters, 2 bachelor's degrees, and 13 professional qualifications. I don't think I've ever met anyone who have taken so many examinations as I did. And I can tell you some funny anecdotes about taking examinations. Now you take a British professional qualification, and they say, okay, in the final part, for the electives, you have to choose 8 subjects, all right? And there are a total of 16. And so you choose 8 out of 16 to complete your final part for that professional qualification. Now, most, if not all, the students or candidates would just choose 8 electives and take 8 exams. But for me, no. Since my failure rate is 70%, I would take 12 electives. You know, I failed 4 and I passed 8, so I still pass like everybody else. So to me, taking an exam was like having breakfast or going for lunch. I think the problem, not just in studies, but in real life, at work, in relationships, and what have you, it's a mindset issue. I have friends who are afraid to take a course, take an examination, study something because they're afraid of failing. I don't, you know, so it's not a problem for me, right? And let me give you another funny anecdote. There was one exam I only passed on my 5th attempt. So it was a 3-hour paper. So the first time I took 3 hours. My second attempt, I took like 2.5. Third attempt, 2 hours. In my 5th attempt, I left the examination hall after 1.5 hours. Oh, half the 3-hour allotted time. And the invigilator said to me, "Oh, Leong, was it really that difficult?" I said, "No, it was too easy. This is my 5th attempt." and then a lot of people began to realize that if I take 5 times to pass an exam, and you, like most people, passed it the first time, who do you think know the subject matter better, you or me? So the bottom line, I think, in business, in work, in your career, whatever, is doing what you do well. And because I'm a slow learner. Now, why am I a slow learner? I have a confession to make. I have a learning disability. If I listen to the lecturer, I cannot take notes. If I take notes, I cannot listen. I can't do 2 things at the same time, which turned out to be quite a funny advantage for me, because when I was studying like in the US, I would tell the professor, "Oh, excuse me, prof, I have this learning ability." And I think that made it very easy for me because, easier to pass, either the score, or rather, very hard to fail because, in some countries, I'm not saying particularly in the United States, right? If you have disability, normally nobody will fail you. If you get the gist of what I'm trying to suggest. And I remember when we were taking exams in the 60s and 70s, they would publish the results in the newspapers, so everybody would know whether you pass or you fail, right? Nowadays, they don't do that anymore. Of course, they discontinued that for decades in Singapore because to save people the embarrassment, that, oh, the whole world knows that in the newspaper that you failed your, O levels or A levels or something. And then around that time, all these professional examinations in the world, in the UK, in Australia, they would publish the results and they would say, "Oh, worldwide subject first placing, Ang Tian Su," or something, So it was a tremendous honor, if not privilege, that your name appears in the newspaper as having won a worldwide subject first placing. And so in my dreams, or I say in my dreams, how could a mediocre student like me ever hope to get a worldwide subject first placing, right? But I did. And here's how it happened. Since I'm not a very good student, I had to find a different way of getting to where I want to go, which in this case is to get a worldwide subject first placing. I checked that they actually publish statistics on how many candidates there are for each examination that is held. For example, there are 20 subjects. And then there's one subject where 1,000 people take that paper. Then there's one subject where 100 people. And so I discovered, hey, there's one professional body in Australia, and they had this one subject that had the lowest number of candidates in most every year. Only about 50 people took that subject every year in the whole wide world. And so for the first time in my life, I think I never studied so hard as for that paper. And like they say, the rest is history. I got my worldwide subject first placing. Well, the failure way to getting recognition. Now, if you are a scholar, now in Singapore, when you say you're a scholar, means you have received a scholarship. And if you have received a scholarship, then they say your life is smooth sailing, because whether you apply for a job, you're trying to find a girlfriend or whatever, right? If you're a scholar, right, you got it made, your life is made. And so I also had this dream, Actually, I must say I'm a very stupid person, because if you are so poor in studies, how can you ever dream of getting a worldwide subject first placing or dream of getting a scholarship? But I did get one. And I'll tell you the story of how it happened. Well, how are scholarships awarded? Typically based on academic achievement, which is something that I could never do, right? But there were scholarships that were awarded based on what the profile of the person is. For example, in Singapore, if you are Hainanese, you belong to the Chinese Hainanese Association, and they give out a scholarship every year, say for a bachelor's degree. So you must be Hainanese, you must be of that age to go to university that year, and then you apply and then you get it, right? So I then realized, hey, it's a game of numbers, right? I need to find a scholarship that can apply where there are so few people who will meet the requirements, the criteria in order to apply for it. So I found one in Australia. There was a professional body, and they had only about, they had a lot of, there are thousands of members in Australia, but they only had like 200 over members in Singapore. And there was a university in Australia that was giving out a bachelor's degree scholarship, one for an Australian and one for an overseas member. And so I applied. Now, it's probably the easiest, if you count by probability or chance, probably the easiest scholarship to get. Because if there are 200 over members in Singapore, right, how many would apply for that scholarship in that particular year, right? As it so happened, I was the only applicant, and so I became a scholar. Okay, so much for studies. Let's move on to another perspective of sometimes failing may be better than succeeding. Every Sunday in the newspapers in Singapore, they will run a full page story, just like what we are doing at this conference today, a full page story of a success story of a person. And one year, this was in 1983, by the way, they asked me if they could interview me for that special Sunday full page story of a success story. And so I said, sure. But I was, until today, I believe, the first, only, and last person to be interviewed in that live section, full page story, where the entire story had nothing to do with success. It was all about my failings in life, my failings in school, my failings in business, my failings in investing, my failings in relationships. And guess what? It became a sensation, I'm on record as the only person ever to have been given his own money radio show weekly for 3 years plus. And there's a little story to that is connected to failing may be better than succeeding. You see, all these money radio shows, until I became the host one time, they always talk about, oh, what's the best thing to invest in? What should you buy? How do you make money? How do you plan your career? Blah, 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 So I ran my show totally 180-degree reverse. My show was focused on, if you are dead broke and cash strapped, this is the money show for you. So if someone calls and says, someone did call and say, oh, Mr. Leong, I have $1 million. Can you help me and tell me how to invest? And my answer would be, well, if $1 million, there are lots of people better than me who can help you to do the investing, but I can't help you because I'm going to help you with your cash trap and dead broke. In other money radio shows, before I became the host, the guests sometimes you get an occasional celebrity guest. The guest would be some very successful investor, a very successful business person, right? In my shows, no. The guest would be someone who owes money everywhere and being chased by loan sharks. Someone who's divorced and the husband is not paying maintenance and she can't feed the family. Someone who has been struggling with a credit card debt for the last 10 or 15 years. But guess what? It became the most popular money radio show ever. I think in the 3 years plus I was there, for 2 years, the morning section that I was on, mine is from 9 to like 10 plus. The morning section 6 to 10 was voted as the most popular radio show among all radio stations in Singapore for 2 years consecutively. Now, when I say all radio stations, it means English as well as Chinese and Malay and Tamil, because I was on a Chinese radio show. Now, failing may sometimes be better than succeeding. And if I'm asked, or often people ask me, what's the catch? If failing is not a problem, then why do people in business, entrepreneurs, hold themselves back from trying something new? Why do people at work hold themselves back from speaking up or suggesting a new innovation or be creative? It's the fear of failure. So imagine if failing, or at least in my case, right? I'm 68 years old today, I can tell you, the failures in my life has been the best things that have happened to me. Of all my failures, you think I'll be the keynote speaker today at the esteemed Royal Institutions Conference? Now, sometimes failings may not be of your own doing, it's not your own fault, right? Maybe you were born poor, or your family has some problem, your spouse has some problem, your children. And let me talk a bit about this part of my life now. No, my father was an entrepreneur and he went bankrupt many times in his life. And so my life was really like a roller coaster, the ups and downs, I was young. There were times where I had a chauffeur who would send me to school and pick me up in a Mercedes Benz. And of course, in the 60s, a Mercedes Benz is like the car to own to show that you have money, And then there were times when my father became bankrupt a few times and you had no money at all. The electricity in my house was cut so many times that I can't, or the water was cut so many times, that we had no water and no electricity. But what has this got to do with making failings into something better and hopefully even better than succeeding? When I was in pre-university, my father was so poor. I didn't even have pocket money to go to school to buy food. In other words, I would literally starve, going to school. And so I had to find an innovative way to feed myself. And what I did was, I asked all the girls in the school, girls like to cook, right? And I said, hey, why don't you bring your food to school? And then we run the exchange scheme. I was the coordinator. I would take a cut of the food, So I literally survived my pre-university on crumbs. Okay. So I think what I want to emphasize today in my presentation is that mindset is the key to success, or at least in my case, the key to failure that leads to success. Now, people who kill themselves, who commit suicide, do you think most of them are successful or unsuccessful people? Do you think most of them are rich or poor people? Well, I can tell you, from anecdotal evidence, most of the people who kill themselves are people who were rich, were ever was once upon a time rich, or was once upon a time successful. You hardly get people who are failures all their life like me killing themselves. Why? Because you see, if a person is successful all his life, he's never failed an exam, he's done well in everything, in work, in business, and when he encounters his first failure, it hits him like a whammy, and a lot of people can't take it, and so they jump. But if you have been struggling all your life and you're failing all your life, it's part and parcel of your life. Why would anybody want to jump? I remember one time on my radio show, someone asked me a question about failing in love. And so I said this little joke to all my listeners. How do you know that the person really loves you? No way, right? Well, there's one way, right? If you're poor, you're unsuccessful, right? Whoever loves you has to love you because you have nothing else for the person to love, right? But if you rich, you got a lot of money, you're very successful, or you're a scholar, you never know. So the person could be loving you not just because you are you, but for something else. But it's just a little joke. Huh? Okay. I'm going to end by addressing the theme or the last few words of the theme today of success stories during COVID-19. In December 2018, I became history. I became the first person in the history of the world to be sued for defamation for sharing on Facebook a news report from a news website without any comment. So I made history. And after a 2.5-year legal battle, the court ruled against me, and I had to pay $262,000. How many pesos is that? $262,000 in damages, legal costs, and disbursements. But it was a Pyrrhic victory because although I lost the case, the people of Singapore crowdfunded not just the $262,000 for me, but a grand total of more than $700,000 to pay for damages and costs for myself and 2 other bloggers. You see, in Singapore's history, I don't know about the Philippines, but in Singapore's history, politicians have been suing people for decades for defamation. Every major news wire in the world has been sued. Wall Street Journal, Economist, Far East, they've all been sued, right? And politicians have been sued. I and the other 2 bloggers happen to be the newbies on the block, so to speak, because we are the bloggers who are being sued in recent years. And it's unprecedented. For the first time in the history of Singapore, the people, in a sense, rose up and paid, and I say again, more than $700,000. So I think this is the last time any politician will sue an ordinary citizen for defamation anymore. And it's not just Singapore, because the human rights activists in like ASEAN are really looking at this case and say, well, the next time some politician in some ASEAN country, sues ordinary citizen for defamation to curtail freedom of expression or something, of course, damages in other ASEAN countries are not like Singapore. They're not like, $200,000, right? We typically like $20,000. Then there will be a campaign in ASEAN, a global campaign, to get 1,000 people to give $20 each and put the politician to shame. And this this problem, of politicians suing people for defamation, hopefully will go away forever. And with that, I thank you for your attention. Thank you.